The sky hung gray and heavy over St. Michael's Church that Tuesday afternoon, like the world itself was holding its breath. Diane Carter stood at the edge of the cemetery, her black dress simple and worn at the hem, her hands clutching a single white rose. She was 61 years old, and after 38 years of marriage, she was burying the other half of her soul. Thomas Carter had been her everything. High school sweethearts who married young and poor, building a life together one paycheck at a time. He worked construction until his body gave out. She cleaned houses until her knees ached every night. Together, they made it work. Together, they were enough. Cancer took him slowly, stealing pieces over 2 brutal years until there was nothing left but love and pain and goodbye. The hospice nurse said he went peacefully in his sleep. Diane liked to think he waited until she left the room because he knew she wouldn't let him go if she was watching. The service was small. Their daughter Rachel lived 3 states away and couldn't afford the trip. A handful of neighbors came, people who remembered Thomas fixing their porches or shoveling their walks without being asked. The pastor spoke kind words about a good man who lived humbly and loved deeply. When it was over, when the casket disappeared into the earth, and the mourners drifted away with awkward hugs and promises to check on her, Diane stood alone under that gray sky and felt the full weight of silence. She drove home in their old truck, the one Thomas refused to replace even when the radio stopped working. The streets of their modest neighborhood blurred past. Maple Street looked the same as always, lined with small houses that had seen better days, chain-link fences, and yards that people kept neat because pride cost nothing. Diane pulled into the driveway of 4127 Maple Street, the house they'd bought for almost nothing 40 years ago. It needed work even then. Thomas spent decades fixing it up, room by room, making it theirs. She expected silence. She expected emptiness. She expected to walk through that door and feel the crushing reality that Thomas would never walk through it again. Instead, she found her front door hanging crooked on broken hinges. Diane's heart lurched. She sat frozen in the truck, staring at the door like it might explain itself. Through the gap, she could see movement inside, shadows shifting. The sound of voices, deep and rough, echoing through rooms that should have been silent. 20 motorcycles sat scattered across her small lawn like metal beasts, chrome gleaming even under the cloudy sky. Heavy boots had torn up the grass Thomas seeded every spring. For a moment, Diane couldn't move, couldn't think. Her mind couldn't process what her eyes were seeing. She'd just buried her husband. She'd just said goodbye to the only person who made her feel safe in this world. And now strangers were in her home. She should have driven away. Should have called 911 from the neighbor's house. Any reasonable person would have done exactly that. But Diane Carter had just buried the love of her life, and something in her had broken open in that cemetery. She had no fear left. No caution. Just a bone-deep exhaustion and the strange clarity that comes when you've already lost everything that matters. She climbed out of the truck slowly, her church shoes crunching on gravel. She walked up the 3 concrete steps Thomas had poured himself, past the railing he painted every other summer. She walked through her own broken doorway like a woman with nothing left to lose. The living room was chaos. 20 massive men in leather vests covered with patches filled every corner of her small house. Beards and tattoos and boots that left marks on her hardwood floors. They were tearing her home apart, pulling books off shelves, moving furniture, checking behind picture frames. One man held her wedding photo in his thick hands, studying it like evidence. Another yanked open kitchen cabinets, spilling Thomas's coffee mugs across the counter. A third crouched by the refrigerator, running his hands along the baseboard, like he expected to find a hidden door. They were searching for something, hunting, moving with purpose. an intensity that filled the small house with barely contained violence. Diane stood in her own doorway, still holding her purse, still wearing her funeral dress, and watched strangers destroy the home she and Thomas had built together. The biggest man spotted her. He was enormous, at least 6'5", with shoulders that barely fit through doorways. His leather vest said, "Tank," across the chest in bold letters. His face was all hard angles and old scars. He charged toward her, and Diane didn't move. Couldn't move. Just stood there as this mountain of a man bore down on her with eyes full of fury and purpose. "Where are they?" Tank demanded, his voice like gravel in a cement mixer. Diane blinked slowly. "Where are what? Don't play stupid, old woman." Another biker stepped forward, younger, but just as dangerous looking. "We know what you've been doing." "I just buried my husband," Diane said quietly, her voice steady despite everything. "An hour ago, I buried my husband of 38 years. The room went still. Every person stopped moving. "Your husband?" Tank's expression shifted, uncertainty creeping into those hard eyes. "Thomas Carter? Cancer?" "The funeral was today at St. Michael's." Diane's voice cracked on his name, but she held Tank's gaze. "I have no idea what you're talking about or why you're in my house." Tank pulled out his phone, his thick fingers moving across the screen. His face drained of color as he read something. "What's your address?" 4127 Maple Street. Dead silence fell like a physical weight. "Say that again," Tank whispered. 4127 Maple Street. "I've lived here for 40 years. Someone in the back of the room spoke up, his voice barely audible. "We're at 4172 Maple Street." The numbers were reversed. They had broken into the wrong house. The silence that followed felt like the moment before lightning strikes. 20 dangerous men stood frozen in Diane Carter's living room, the reality of their mistake settling over them like ash. Tank's face had gone from threatening to horrified in the span of a heartbeat. His eyes swept across the room, taking in the chaos they'd created with fresh understanding. This wasn't a criminal's hideout. This was someone's home. An old woman's home. A grieving widow's home. Diane's eyes followed his gaze and truly saw the destruction for the first time. Her couch had been shoved against the wall, cushions torn open and scattered. Thomas's recliner, the one he'd sat in every evening for 20 years, lay tipped on its side. Books she'd collected since childhood were heaped on the floor like trash. But what broke her was the china cabinet. Margaret's china cabinet. The beautiful oak piece Thomas had refinished as an anniversary gift 15 years ago lay tipped over on its side. The glass doors had shattered, and spread across the hardwood floor like snow were the remains of her teacup collection. 40 years of collecting. 40 years of memories. Each cup had a story. The rose-patterned one her mother gave her on her wedding day. The delicate blue one Thomas bought her on their first anniversary when they could barely afford groceries. The cheerful yellow one Rachel picked out when she was 7, saving her allowance for 3 months. Tiny fragments of porcelain glittered in the afternoon light streaming through the window. Handles separated from cups. Saucers broken into jagged pieces. 40 years of love and memories, shattered in minutes by strangers looking for an address they'd written down wrong. "You broke my china," Diane whispered, her voice so soft it barely carried across the room. She moved forward like she was walking through water, each step heavy and slow. Her knees found the floor among the broken pieces. Her fingers, still trembling from the funeral, from holding Thomas's hand one last time, now touched the fragment of her mother's rose cup. The sob came from somewhere deep inside, from that hollow place where Thomas used to be. It started as a sound she didn't recognize as her own, building into something raw and broken that she couldn't control even if she wanted to. Diane Carter knelt on the floor of her destroyed home and cried. Not for the china, though that hurt. Not for the broken door or the torn cushions or the violated sense of safety. She cried for Thomas, for being alone, for coming home from his funeral to find chaos when all she needed was quiet, for the unfairness of a world that could take everything from you and still find ways to take more. 20 dangerous men who'd broken down doors and faced down criminals without flinching, stood paralyzed watching one elderly woman sob among broken teacups. Some looked away. Others stared at their boots. The weight of what they'd done hung in the air like smoke. Tank knelt beside her slowly, his massive frame lowering until he was on her level. Ma'am, he said, and his voice was completely different now, stripped of all threat and anger. I don't know what to say. We made a terrible mistake. Why? Diane managed through tears, holding a piece of painted porcelain like it was made of diamond. Why are you even here? Tank hesitated, glancing at his men. We got a tip. A solid tip that 4172 Maple Street was being used for child trafficking. Kids being held in a basement. We thought we had to move fast. Diane's head snapped up, tears still streaming down her face. Next door? The Hendersons? You know them? Diane struggled to focus through her grief. I barely know them. They keep to themselves. Moved in about 2 years ago after the Robinsons passed away. Their children sold the house quick, didn't even clean it out properly. Tank's eyes sharpened with interest, despite the terrible situation. What else do you know? About them? Diane wiped her face with shaking hands, trying to think. They have a white van. It comes and goes at strange hours, sometimes very late at night. I used to hear it when I was up with Thomas during his bad nights. A voice caught on his name. The basement windows are always covered with black plastic. I thought maybe they were developing photographs or something. Tank stood and pulled out his phone, stepping away to make a call. Check 4172 right now, he said in a low, urgent voice. Go quiet. We might have the right street, wrong house number. Half the bikers disappeared through Diane's back door like shadows, moving with practiced silence that seemed impossible for men so large. The ones who remained started carefully picking up broken china, their rough hands surprisingly gentle as they gathered pieces. Tank returned and crouched beside Diane again. Ma'am, I'm going to fix everything we broke. I promise you that on my life. You can't fix these, Diane said, looking at the fragments of her mother's cup. You can't fix what mattered most. No, Tank admitted, and there was genuine pain in his voice. But I can try to make this right somehow. I can try. A biker Diane hadn't noticed before, younger with kind eyes, brought her a glass of water from her own kitchen. She took it with shaking hands, not drinking, just holding it because she didn't know what else to do. Minutes crawled by like hours. Diane sat among her broken things while strange men moved quietly around her house, trying to restore some order to the chaos they'd created. They didn't speak. The only sounds were careful footsteps and the soft clink of porcelain pieces being gathered. Then Tank's phone buzzed. He answered it instantly. Talk to me. Diane couldn't hear the voice on the other end, but she watched Tank's face transform. Every muscle tightened. His jaw clenched so hard she could see veins standing out on his neck. His eyes went dark with something terrible and ancient. How many? He asked through gritted teeth. The answer made him close his eyes like he'd been struck. Call the police right now, Tank ordered into the phone. Secure the perimeter. Nobody leaves that house. Nobody. He ended the call and looked at Diane with eyes that had seen too much horror in this world. 7 children in that basement. Ages 4 to 12. Cages. Locks. Medical equipment. The glass slipped from Diane's hand, water spilling across the hardwood floor Thomas had refinished himself. 7 children? She whispered. Next door? 20 feet from where Thomas and I slept every single night for 2 years. They always seem normal, Tank said grimly. That's how they survive. That's how they keep doing it. Police sirens shattered the quiet of Maple Street within minutes, their wailing cutting through the late afternoon air like knives. Diane stood at her broken window, still in her funeral dress, watching as squad cars surrounded the house next. Door with lights flashing red and blue against the fading daylight. Officers poured out with weapons drawn, moving with the careful precision of people who understood exactly what they were walking into. Tank stood beside her, his massive presence somehow comforting now instead of threatening. The other bikers had positioned themselves around her yard, silent sentinels making sure nothing went wrong. You should sit down, ma'am, one of the younger bikers said gently. His name patch read Tiny, though he stood well over 6 feet tall. This might be hard to watch, but Diane couldn't sit. Couldn't look away. 7 children had been suffering 20 feet from her bedroom window, while she and Thomas lived their quiet life, noticing nothing, suspecting nothing. The guilt felt like a physical weight pressing down on her chest. The first child emerged, wrapped in a blanket, carried by a female officer who held her like something infinitely precious and infinitely fragile. The little girl couldn't have been more than 5 years old, her face buried against the officer's shoulder. She was so thin, so heartbreakingly small. Diane's hand flew to her mouth. Another child followed, then another. Boys and girls, all different ages, all with that same haunted look in their eyes. Some cried, some stared at nothing. One boy, maybe 8 years old, flinched when an officer tried to comfort him, like kindness was something he'd forgotten existed. Oh, my God, Diane breathed. Those babies, those poor babies. Each child was carried to waiting ambulances, paramedics wrapping them in fresh blankets and speaking in soft voices. Diane recognized some of their faces from missing person flyers at the grocery store, photos she'd walked past 100 times without really seeing. Faces that became wallpaper after a while, just part of the background noise of tragedy you couldn't fix. But she could have fixed this. If she'd paid attention. If she'd reported the strange hours and the covered windows and the feeling that then something wasn't quite right about the HENDRSONS. Mrs. Henderson was dragged out in handcuffs minutes later, screaming that it was all a misunderstanding, that those children were relatives she was helping, that the police had no right. Her voice was shrill and desperate, so different from the quiet, nervous woman who'd waved hello over the fence. Mr. Henderson said nothing at all. His face was completely blank, empty of everything human. He didn't look at the children or the police or the growing crowd of neighbors. He just stared straight ahead like none of this was real. I used to wave to them, Diane said, her voice hollow. Mrs. Henderson would smile back, but it was always nervous, tight. I thought she was just shy. You couldn't have known, Tank said firmly. These people are experts at hiding. That's how they operate. But the van, the covered windows, I noticed. I just didn't think. Nobody ever thinks it could be happening next door, Tank interrupted. That's what they count on. Normal people can't imagine that kind of evil living right beside them. FBI agents arrived within the hour, black SUVs replacing some of the police cars. They moved with quiet efficiency, disappearing into the Henderson house with evidence kits and cameras. News vans followed close behind, satellite dishes rising like strange flowers. Reporters set up on the sidewalk, their camera lights harsh against the gathering dusk. Diane's quiet street, where nothing ever happened, where people knew their neighbors and kids rode bikes until the streetlights came on, had become a circus. Of flashing lights and yellow crime scene tape, a young reporter tried to approach Diane's yard. But Tiny stepped forward, all 6 feet 7 inches of him, and the reporter decided to interview someone else instead. "Thank you," Diane said quietly. "Nobody's bothering you tonight, ma'am," Tiny replied. "You've been through enough." Around 8 o'clock, a detective came to Diane's door. She was a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and a kind face. "Mrs. Carter, I'm Detective Williams. I need to ask you some questions about your neighbors." They sat at Diane's kitchen table, the same table where she and Thomas had eaten breakfast every morning for 40 years. Tank stood nearby, protective, while Detective Williams pulled out a notepad. "How long have the Hendersons lived next door?" "About 2 years. They moved in right after the Robinsons passed away. The Robinson children wanted to sell quickly, so they took the first offer." "Did you interact with the Hendersons much?" "No. They kept to themselves. We'd wave hello if we saw each other outside, but that was all." Thomas tried to be neighborly at first, offered to help them move furniture, but Mr. Henderson said they had it handled. "Did you ever see the children?" Diane's stomach turned. "No, never. I had no idea there were children in that house." "What? About vehicles? Visitors?" "They had a white van. It came and went at odd hours, sometimes very late at night. I'd hear it when I was up with my husband during his treatments." Her voice cracked. "He had cancer. Bad nights when he couldn't sleep." Detective Williams's expression softened. "I'm very sorry for your loss." "The funeral was today," Diane said, and saying it out loud made it real all over again. "I came home from burying my husband and found these men in my house because they mixed up the address numbers. I heard about that. The bikers?" Tank stepped forward. "That was us, Detective. We received intelligence about 4172. We transposed the numbers and hit the wrong house. But Mrs. Carter's information about the Hendersons confirmed we had the right location." Detective Williams studied Tank with the expression of someone who dealt with his type before. "We'll need your source for that intelligence. Anonymous tip line. You know how it works." "I know you guys operate in gray areas," the detective said carefully. "But tonight, you saved 7 children. We'll call it even." She turned back to Diane. "What else can you tell me about the basement windows?" "They've been covered with black plastic since the Hendersons moved in. I thought maybe they were using the basement for darkroom photography or storage. It didn't seem that strange." "Did you ever hear anything? Sounds from their house?" Diane thought hard, reaching back through 2 years of memories. "Sometimes, at night, I'd hear a voice, high-pitched. I thought it was a television, or maybe Mrs. Henderson talking on the phone. It never lasted long enough to seem concerning. It had been a child, screaming or crying or calling for help, and she dismissed it as television noise. The guilt threatened to swallow her whole." "Mrs. Carter," Detective Williams said gently, seeming to read her thoughts, "you are not responsible for what happened in that house. The only people responsible are in handcuffs right now." But Diane had lived next to suffering for 2 years and never knew. Had heard voices and dismissed them. Had noticed strange patterns and thought nothing of it. How could she not carry some of that weight? After the detective left, promising to follow up with more questions, Diane found herself alone with the bikers again. Full darkness had fallen. The street outside still blazed with police lights and news cameras, but her house felt separate from all of it, like an island of quiet in a storm. "Ma'am," Tank said softly, "we need to talk about fixing your house." "It's late," Diane said tiredly. "You should go. We broke it. We fix it. Tonight. I can't pay you." Tank's expression was almost gentle. "We don't want your money. We want to make this right." The bikers worked through the night like men possessed by purpose. Tank made phone calls, and within an hour, 2 trucks arrived loaded with supplies, tools, and materials. Diane tried to protest, tried to send them away, but Tank was immovable as a mountain. "Rest, ma'am," he said firmly. "We'll wake you if we need anything." But Diane couldn't rest. Couldn't sleep in a house full of strangers, no matter how much they were trying to help. She sat in Thomas's recliner, which they'd already set up right, and watched these dangerous-looking men transform into something else entirely. They worked with surprising skill and care. The broken door came down within minutes. Tank himself installed a new one, solid oak with a deadbolt that looked like it could stop a tank. "Better than what you had before," he said. "Nobody's getting through this without a battering ram." 2. Bikers patched the damaged walls where they'd searched behind furniture. Their hands, covered in tattoos and scars, smoothed joint compound with practiced precision. One of them, a man named Marcus with a gray beard, noticed her watching. "Worked construction for 20 years before I retired," he explained. "Old habits die hard." Another biker, younger with bright blue eyes, carefully gathered every book from the floor. He checked each spine for damage before returning them to the shelves in alphabetical order. When he caught Diane looking, he shrugged almost shyly. "I was a librarian before. Couldn't stand seeing books treated rough." Tiny, the enormous biker who'd brought her water earlier, sat cross-legged on her floor with the broken china spread around him like a puzzle. He had a bottle of special adhesive and steady hands that seemed impossible for someone his size. He worked with intense concentration, fitting tiny fragments together, holding them while the glue set. Diane stood and moved closer, drawn by the careful way he handled the pieces of her life. "My grandmother collected teacups," Tiny said without looking up. "She had over 100 of them. When she passed, my mother gave them all away before I could stop her. Said they were just gathering dust." His voice was soft, almost sad. "I know what these mean to people. I know they're not just cups. Can you save them?" Diane asked. "Some of them. The ones that broke clean. Others." He gestured at a pile of pieces too small to repair. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Some things, once they're broken, can't be put back together." But he was trying. This giant of a man with tattooed knuckles and scars across his hands was spending hours trying to glue her memories back together. Diane felt something crack open in her chest, some tight knot of anger and grief loosening just slightly. "The rose cup," she said quietly. "The one with little pink roses. That was from my mother. She gave it to me on my wedding day." Tiny's hands paused. He looked through the pieces until he found the fragment she meant. "I'll try, ma'am. I promise. I'll try my best." By 2 in the morning, the house had transformed. Fresh paint covered the damaged walls. Squeaky floorboards Thomas had been meaning to fix for years no longer made a sound. Broken light fixtures had been replaced. Even the kitchen faucet that had dripped for months was silent and still. Tank found Diane in the kitchen making coffee for the workers. "You should be sleeping." "I slept next to a dying man for 2 years," Diane said. "I forgot how to sleep through the night." He accepted a cup when she offered it, adding 3 sugars. They stood in her kitchen in comfortable silence while power tools hummed in other rooms. "Why do you do this?" Diane asked finally. "The children, I mean. Why risk everything?" Tank was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee like it held answers. "My daughter was taken when she was 9 years old. Disappeared from her front yard while I was inside watching TV. They found her 3 months later in a basement 2 states away." Diane's heart clenched. "Oh, Tank." She survived, physically. But the girl who came back wasn't the same girl who disappeared. She's 32 now. Still can't sleep without lights on. Still flinches when men raise their voices. His jaw tightened. The police did everything they could, but they had rules. Procedures. Warrants and paperwork and time. Meanwhile, my baby was in a cage. I'm so sorry. After that, I found others. Men who'd lost children or knew children who'd been taken. We started doing what the law couldn't, operating in those gray spaces where justice moves slow. He looked at her directly. We're not heroes, ma'am. We're just fathers who got tired of watching children hurt while everyone follows protocol. Diane understood something then. These weren't criminals or thugs. They were broken fathers trying to save other people's children because they couldn't save their own. The 7 children next door, she said. They're safe because of you. They're safe because you told us about the Hendersons instead of just screaming at us to leave your house. You had every right to call the police on us. Your information made the difference. Diane hadn't thought about it that way. Her tragedy, Thomas's death, the awful timing that brought her home at exactly the moment when these men were in her house. All of it had led to those children being found. Maybe there was purpose in the pain. Maybe there was meaning in the timing. By dawn, the house looked better than it had in years. The bikers packed up their tools as the sun rose over Maple Street. Police were still working next door, but most of the news vans had left, chasing the next story. Tank handed Diane a business card with just a phone number printed on it. Anything you need ever, you call this number. Day or night, someone will answer. Why do all this for a stranger? Diane asked, though she was beginning to understand. Because we broke into your house on the worst day of your life. Because we destroyed things that mattered to you. Because even when we make terrible mistakes, we try to make them right. Tank paused and looked toward the house next door. And because those 7 children are free now, partly because you helped us instead of turning us away. He climbed onto his motorcycle, the engine roaring to life. One by one, the other bikers followed. Tiny was the last to leave. He handed Diane a cardboard box carefully before mounting his bike. I saved what I could, he said simply. After they were gone, Diane opened the box. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, were 12 teacups. Not perfect. The cracks were visible, thin lines of glue holding pieces together. But they were whole, functional. Save. The rose cup from her mother sat on top, carefully restored. When Diane lifted it, she could see where it had broken, but it held together. Still beautiful. Still precious. Still hers. Some things, once broken, could be put back together. They'd never be the same as before. The cracks would always show, but sometimes that made them stronger, more valuable, worth more because of what they'd survived. Diane Carter held her mother's cup and cried for the 3rd time that day. But these tears were different. Not just grief now. Something else mixing in. Something that felt almost like hope. The FBI interviewed Diane for 6 hours the following day. They came to her house with questions that seemed endless, diving into every detail she could remember about the Hendersons over the past 2 years. What time did the van usually arrive? Which direction did it come from? Had she ever seen anyone else entering or leaving? Did Mrs. Henderson ever mention family? Did Mr. Henderson work from home? Diane answered everything as best she could, but it felt inadequate. The details she dismissed as normal became crucial evidence. The nervous smile she thought was shyness was fear. The covered basement windows weren't photography equipment. They were concealment. The late-night van wasn't working odd hours. It was trafficking children. Agent Morrison, a stern woman in her 50s, asked the hardest question. Mrs. Carter, did you ever hear anything unusual from the house? Voices? Sounds that seemed out of place? Diane's throat tightened. Sometimes. Late at night, when I was sitting up with Thomas, I'd hear what sounded like a high-pitched voice. I thought it was their television. How often? Maybe once a month? It never lasted long. A few seconds at most. Did you ever investigate? No. The word felt like a confession. I thought I was being nosy. Thomas always said we should mind our own business. Agent Morrison's expression softened slightly. Mrs. Carter, you're a victim here too. The Hendersons chose your street specifically because of people like you and your husband. Good people who respect privacy and don't ask questions. That's not a character flaw. It's what made you good neighbors. But it didn't feel that way. It felt like 7 children had suffered while Diane lived her life 20 feet away, noticing just enough to feel guilty about forever. The agent left her with more business cards and promises to follow up. The investigation would take months, maybe years. The children were being cared for in specialized facilities. Some had families desperately searching for them. Others had been missing so long that finding their families would be like solving a puzzle with half the pieces gone. That night, Diane sat in her restored living room and felt the full weight of loneliness. The house was clean and repaired. Better than before the bikers arrived, but Thomas was still gone. The funeral felt like years ago instead of just 2 days. Time moved strangely when grief was involved. She picked up the rose teacup Tiny had repaired and traced the glue lines with her finger. The cup had broken and been put back together. It would never be the same, but it could still hold tea, still serve its purpose, still matter. Maybe she could too. The phone rang at 9 o'clock. Diane almost didn't answer. She wasn't ready for more condolence calls from distant relatives who barely remembered Thomas. But something made her pick up. Double quotes, Mrs. Carter? It's Tank. His gravelly voice was unmistakable. Hello, Tank. Just calling to check on you. Make sure the house is holding up okay. It's perfect. Better than it's been in years. Diane paused. Thank you again for everything. You already thanked us, ma'am. You don't need to keep doing it. He was quiet for a moment. Actually, I'm calling because we could use your help with something. Only if you're up for it. No pressure. My help? With what? We got another tip. Different location. We need someone to do surveillance. Watch a house during the day. See who comes and goes. An old woman walking her dog past the house doesn't raise suspicion. A biker on a motorcycle does. Diane's heart beat faster. You want me to spy on someone? I want you to help us save children, if you're willing. If you're not, I completely understand. You've been through hell this week. She should have said no. Should have explained that she was 61 years old and grieving, and had no business getting involved with investigating criminals. But instead, she heard herself ask, what would I need to do? Tank explained it carefully. There was a house 3 neighborhoods over where children had been reported coming and going at odd hours. The tip wasn't solid enough for police involvement yet, but it was worth watching. All Diane would need to do was walk past the house twice a day with a dog. Note if she saw anything unusual, report back. I don't have a dog, Diane said. We'll get you a dog. Small one, friendly, good cover and good company. And if I see something, if there really are children in danger, you call me immediately. We handle it from there. You never put yourself at risk. Ever. That's non-negotiable. Diane thought about those 7 children carried out of the house next door. Thought about the boy who flinched at kindness and the little girl so thin she looked breakable. Thought about all the other children still waiting to be found. When do I start? She asked. Tank was quiet, and she could almost hear his smile through the phone. Tomorrow morning. I'll bring the dog by at 8. That night, Diane slept better than she had in years. Not because the grief was gone, Thomas's absence still ached like a physical wound, but because she had purpose again. Something to wake up for beyond. Just getting through another day. Tank arrived at exactly 8. The next morning with a small beagle mix on a leash. The dog had soulful brown eyes and a tail that wagged like a metronome. This is Scout, Tank said, handing over the leash. She's 3 years old, fully trained, loves everyone. She's yours now. Mine? Every good cover story needs to be real. You're an old woman who walks her dog. That's not a lie if you actually have a dog. Scout sniffed Diane's hand, then licked her fingers. Something tight in Diane's chest loosened. She hadn't realized how quiet the house had been without Thomas until Scout's toenails clicked across the hardwood floor. Tank gave her the address, showed her a photo of the house on his phone. 2 passes a day, morning and evening. Different times if you can manage it. Note the cars, the people, anything that seems off. Text me updates. I don't text. You do now. He pulled out a simple cell phone, already programmed with my number. Just type your message and hit send. Diane took the phone, feeling like she'd stepped into a spy movie. What if someone realizes what I'm doing? Nobody pays attention to old women walking dogs. You're invisible in the best possible way. Tank's expression turned serious. But if anyone approaches you or makes you uncomfortable, you leave immediately and call me. Your safety comes first, always. The first surveillance walk felt surreal. Diane had lived in this city her whole life, but had never walked through the Riverside neighborhood 3 miles from her house. Tank drove her there and parked 2 blocks from the target house so she could walk. Scout naturally. The neighborhood was working class, similar to her own. Small houses with chain-link fences and cars in various states of repair. Children's toys scattered in yards. The kind of place where people worked hard and kept their heads down. The target house was pale blue with white trim, unremarkable in every way. A set-in sat in the driveway. Curtains covered every window. Diane walked past slowly, Scout sniffing every bush and fire hydrant like dogs do. She noted everything. The car's make and license plate, the lawn that needed mowing, the mail sticking out of the mailbox, a child's bicycle lying on its side near the front porch, looking rusty and unused. Nothing seemed obviously wrong, but nothing felt quite right either. The house had that same closed-off feeling as the Hendersons' place, private, sealed, separate from the neighborhood around it. Diane walked, Scout around the block and back to where Tank waited. He listened to her observations without interrupting, typing notes into his phone. "Good work," he said. "Evening pass at 6, I'll be there." It became a routine. Morning and evening, Diane walked Scout past the blue house, noting changes. On the 3rd day, she saw a man carry groceries inside, lots of them, more than 2 people would need. On the 5th day, she saw curtains move in an upstairs window, but couldn't see who was behind them. On the 7th day, she heard children laughing. The laughter was faint but unmistakable, high-pitched and brief, cutting through the quiet morning air before being silenced abruptly. Diane's heart raced as she continued walking Scout past the blue house, forcing herself to maintain the same slow, elderly pace she'd used all week. Her hands trembled as she pulled out the phone Tank had given her. She walked another block before stopping to text, her fingers clumsy on the small keys. Heard children laughing inside. 10:23 a.m. Stopped suddenly. Tank's response came within seconds. How many voices? At least 2. Maybe 3. Hard to tell. Good work. Continue normal pattern. I'm sending backup to watch the house. Diane completed her walk and returned home, where Scout immediately curled up in Thomas's old recliner like she'd lived there forever. The dog had become a comfort, something alive and warm in the too-quiet house. Diane found herself talking to Scout the way she used to talk to Thomas, narrating her day, sharing thoughts out loud just to hear a voice. Tank called that evening. We've had eyes on the house all day. Saw a delivery van arrive around 2. Driver took 3 large boxes. Inside, stayed for less than 5 minutes. Too quick for a normal delivery. What do you think it means? Could be supply delivery. Food, clothing, supplies for however many people are in there. We've seen this pattern before." His voice was grim. "We're going to move on this soon. FBI is involved now, thanks to your surveillance. They're building a case. How long will that take? Could be days. Could be weeks. They need solid evidence before they can get a warrant. Days or weeks. Meanwhile, children might be suffering behind those closed curtains." Diane thought about the 7 from next door, how long they'd waited for rescue. Every day mattered when you were a child in a cage. "What can I do?" Diane asked. "Keep doing exactly what you're doing. You're giving us the pattern we need to predict their behavior." Over the next week, Diane documented everything. The blue sedan left every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 a.m., returning by 9. A different car, a dark SUV, arrived on Wednesdays just after sunset and left before midnight. The grocery deliveries came every 4 days like clockwork. And sometimes, if she walked past at just the right moment, she heard children. A cry quickly muffled. Laughter cut short. Once, she clearly heard a young voice say, "I'm hungry," before an adult voice shushed them quiet. Each sound drove a spike through her heart. She reported everything to Tank, who shared it with the FBI. Agent Morrison called her directly on the 10th day of surveillance. "Mrs. Carter, your observations have been invaluable. We're preparing to execute a search warrant tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. I wanted you to know because you've earned that much. Will the children be okay? We have child services ready to respond the moment we confirm there are minors in the house. Medical personnel on standby. These children will be cared for." "Can I be there?" Diane asked, surprising herself. "Not close. I know that's not allowed. But nearby? I need to know they're safe." Agent Morrison was quiet for a moment. "I'll have an agent pick you up at 5:30. You'll observe from a distance only. Understood?" "Understood." Diane didn't sleep that night. She sat in Thomas's recliner with Scout curled beside her, watching the clock crawl toward morning. She thought about Thomas and wished he was here to tell her she was doing the right thing. He'd always been her compass, her moral center. Without him, she had to trust herself. At 5:15, she dressed in dark, practical clothes, fed Scout and left extra water. At 5:30 exactly, an unmarked car pulled into her driveway. The agent driving was young, probably not even 30, with kind eyes. "Mrs. Carter? I'm Agent Rodriguez. Agent Morrison asked me to bring you." They drove through dark streets to Riverside, parking 3 blocks from the blue house. Police vehicles were already in position, hidden from view. Diane could see Tank's motorcycle among them, along with several other bikers who'd apparently been invited to observe. Agent Morrison approached Diane's car as the sun began to pink the eastern sky. "Thank you for your service to this investigation, Mrs. Carter. What you've done has made this possible. I just walked the dog past the house. You gave us the pattern and the evidence we needed. Sometimes the smallest observations crack the biggest cases." Morrison checked her watch. "We move in 4 minutes. Stay in this vehicle no matter what happens." Diane nodded, her throat too tight to speak. At exactly 6 a.m., officers moved on the house from all directions. The front door came down with a battering ram. Shouts of "Police! Search warrant!" echoed through the quiet neighborhood. Lights came on in surrounding houses as residents woke to the commotion. Diane gripped the car's door handle, watching, waiting, praying she was wrong, that the house would be empty of children, that this would all be a terrible mistake. But she wasn't wrong. The first child emerged in an officer's arms 6 minutes later. A little boy, maybe 6 years old, wearing pajamas that hung off his thin frame. Then another child, a girl with tangled hair and bare feet despite the cool morning air. Then 3 more children in quick succession, all young. All clearly terrified and malnourished. 5 children total. Diane watched them being carried to waiting ambulances, wrapped in blankets, handled with heartbreaking gentleness by paramedics who'd seen this before. 5 more children who'd been hidden in plain sight while the world went about its business around them. 2 adults were brought out in handcuffs. A man and woman who looked so ordinary they could have been anyone's neighbors. The woman cried and claimed innocence. The man stayed silent, just like Mr. Henderson had. Tank appeared at Diane's car window. His face was hard with satisfaction and rage mixed together. 5 more saved. Because you paid attention. Because you cared enough to look. I just walked past the house, Diane said again, but her voice shook. You did more than that. You gave those children a chance at life again. Tank's expression softened. You did good, Diane, real good. It was the first time he'd used her first name. Somehow that felt significant, like she'd crossed some invisible line from victim. They'd wronged a partner they respected. The FBI processed the scene for hours. Diane waited, unable to leave until she knew every detail. The children ranged from 4 to 9 years old. 3 had been reported missing from different states. 2 were never reported at all. Taken so young, they probably didn't remember their real families. Agent Morrison came to brief her personally before she left. We found evidence linking this house to a larger network. This wasn't isolated. You've helped us crack something bigger than we initially thought. There are more houses? More children? We believe so. And now we have leads to follow. Morrison handed Diane her card. I know Tank has already recruited you, but I wanted to officially thank you for your cooperation with the FBI. You have good instincts. If you ever notice anything else suspicious, call me directly. Tank drove Diane home. Her car would be delivered later by Agent Rodriguez. Scout greeted them at the door, like they'd been gone for days instead of hours. The dog's simple joy at their return felt like a balm on Diane's exhausted heart. You should rest, Tank said. You've been up all night. I need to walk Scout. Keep the routine normal. Diane. Tank's voice was gentle but firm. Rest. The mission is over. Those kids are safe. You did your part. But as he turned to leave, Diane caught his arm. Will there be other missions? Other children who need finding. Tank studied her face for a long moment. Yeah, there will be. There always are. Then I'm not done. Diane straightened her spine, feeling something solid settling inside her. Thomas and I couldn't have children of our own. It broke both our hearts for 40 years. But maybe this is why. Maybe I was supposed to be free to do this. This isn't easy work, Diane. It's hard and it's dark, and it'll change you. I've buried my husband and helped save 12 children in 2 weeks. I'm already changed. She met his eyes steadily. I have nothing to lose and everything to give. Use me where you need me. Tank's scarred face broke into something almost like a smile. Welcome to the family, then. For real this time. 3 months passed like water flowing downhill, steady and purposeful. Diane Carter settled into her new life with surprising ease. The grief over Thomas didn't disappear. Some mornings she still woke reaching for him, but it shared space now with purpose. With meaning. Tank introduced her to the broader network slowly, carefully. The biker club wasn't just 20 men riding motorcycles. It was a coordinated operation spanning 3 states, with informants, resources, and connections that operated in the shadows where law enforcement couldn't quite reach. They called themselves the Guardians, though they had no official name, no paperwork, no legal standing. Just a loose organization of fathers and mothers, uncles and aunts, people who'd lost children or known children who'd been lost. People who'd decided that following every rule meant letting evil win. Diane learned she was perfect for surveillance work. An elderly black woman walking a small dog through neighborhoods drew zero suspicion. She was invisible in the best possible way, people's eyes sliding right past her like she was part of the scenery. She could stand on a corner for 20 minutes and nobody questioned it. Could walk the same street 4 times in one day and nobody noticed. "You're a natural," Marcus, the ex-construction worker, told her after her 3rd successful surveillance mission. "Most people can't disappear in plain sight like you do." She helped locate 4 more children over those 3 months. A boy held in a storage unit behind his captor's business. Twin girls living in a basement while their legal guardian claimed they'd gone to live with relatives. A teenager locked in an attic room, so thoroughly convinced she was worthless that she didn't even try to escape. Each rescue broke Diane's heart and rebuilt it stronger. Each child saved felt like honoring Thomas's memory, like using the time she had left for something that truly mattered. The guardians became her family in ways she hadn't expected. Tiny taught her how to repair broken things, not just china, but furniture and toys, and the small objects that brought comfort. Marcus showed her how to take detailed surveillance photos without being obvious. A woman named Beth, who'd lost her daughter 20 years ago, became Diane's closest friend, someone who understood grief and purpose mixed together. Tank checked on her weekly, always careful not to push too hard, always watching to make sure she wasn't burning out. But Diane had never felt more alive. Thomas would have understood. He'd spent his life fixing things, making the world a little better one repair at a time. She was doing the same thing, just with higher stakes. The FBI officially brought her on as a consultant after the Riverside case. Agent Morrison arranged for minimal payment, enough to cover gas and expenses for her surveillance work. It wasn't about the money. Diane would have done it for free, but Morrison insisted. "You're providing valuable intelligence," the agent said. "You should be compensated." The payment helped. Thomas's life insurance had covered the funeral and bought some time, but bills didn't stop just because grief did. The consultant money kept Diane independent, kept her in the house she and Thomas had built together. On a Tuesday in late spring, Tank called with an unusual request. "We've got a situation, different than our normal operations. Woman being abused by her landlord, threatening to evict her if she doesn't comply with his demands. She's got 2 kids and nowhere to go." "That's terrible, but it's not trafficking," Diane said carefully. "Is this our kind of case?" "She lives at 4127 Maple Street," Tank said quietly. Diane's breath caught. "Her house." He was talking about her. "Tank, I don't understand." "That landlord, Mr. Peters, he's been calling you, hasn't he? Making demands about the property?" He had been. Ever since Thomas died, Mr. Peters had been calling about repairs he claimed Diane was responsible for, about raising the rent, about her being too old to maintain the property properly. She'd been ignoring him, focused on her work with the Guardians. "How did you know?" "We protect our people, Diane. All of them. And you're one of ours now." Tank's voice was firm. "Peters has a history. 3 other elderly widows he's forced out of their homes through harassment and threats. He targets women who've just lost husbands. Thinks they're vulnerable. What are you going to do?" "We're going to have a conversation with Mr. Peters. Help him understand that you're not alone, that you've got family looking out for you." 2 days later, Mr. Peters called Diane to apologize. His voice shook as he explained there'd been a terrible misunderstanding, that all those repairs and rent increases weren't necessary, that she should stay in the house as long as she wanted at her current rate. Diane didn't ask what conversation the bikers had with him. She didn't need to know. She just understood, finally and fully, what Tank meant when he said she was family. That Sunday, the Guardians threw a gathering at their clubhouse, a large warehouse on the outskirts of town. It wasn't a party exactly, more like a family dinner that happened to include 50 people in leather vests. Children ran around the space. Kids who'd been rescued over the years and their adoptive families. People who'd been saved by the guardians and stayed connected. The sound of laughter, real and unafraid, filled the warehouse like music. Tank found Diane sitting on a bench, watching the children play. Scout lay at her feet, content and tired from being petted by dozens of small hands. Big change from 3 months ago, Tank observed. I buried my husband. My house got broken into. My life got turned upside down. Diane smiled softly. Best thing that ever happened to me. You don't mean that. I do. Thomas was everything to me. Losing him almost killed me. But you gave me a reason to survive the grief. You gave me purpose when I had none. She looked at Tank directly. I'm grateful. For all of it, even the broken china. Tank was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his vest and pulled out a leather patch. It was simple, just one word embroidered in silver thread. Guardian. For you, he said. You've more than earned it. Diane took the patch with shaking hands. I don't have a vest. You do now. Tiny appeared carrying a leather vest, sized for Diane's frame, soft and broken in like it had been worn for years. The Guardian patch would go over the heart. There was space for more patches as she earned them, but this one was the most important. Honorary member for life, Tank said. You're one of us now, officially. Diane put on the vest, and it felt like putting on armor. Like claiming an identity she hadn't known she needed. The other Guardians noticed and started gathering around, offering congratulations and hugs. Beth clasped Diane's hand. Welcome home, sister, and it was home. These scarred, rough people, who rode motorcycles and broke rules and saved children, they were her family now. Not instead of Thomas, but alongside his memory. He'd given her 40 years of love. They were giving her purpose for however many years remained. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, approached shyly. Diane recognized her from the riverside. Rescue, the one with tangled hair who'd been carried out barefoot. Are you the lady who walks the dog? The girl asked. I am. Her name is Scout. Agent Morrison said you helped find me. That you walked past the house and told people I was there. Diane's throat tightened. I did. The girl threw her arms around Diane's waist in a fierce hug. Thank you for noticing me. Thank you for caring that I was there. Diane hugged her back. This precious child who'd been invisible for so long, and felt tears stream down her face. This was why. This was the point of all of it. This moment right here. When the girl ran back to play with the other children, Tank handed Diane a napkin for her tears. You okay? The better than okay. Diane wiped her face and watched the children play. Really play. Safe and free and loved. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. That night, Diane drove home with Scout sleeping in the passenger seat and her new vest folded carefully beside her. The house on Maple Street was dark and quiet, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like a base of operations, a place to rest between missions. She hung the vest carefully in the closet next to Thomas's old jacket. They looked right together, his worn denim and her leather. Two different lives that somehow made sense side by side. I hope you'd be proud, she whispered to his jacket. To his memory, to the love that still lived in every corner of this house. I hope you understand why I'm doing this. The answer came not in words, but in feeling. A warmth in her chest. A certainty that settled deep. Thomas had spent his life building and fixing and helping. She was doing the same thing, just in ways neither of them could have predicted. Some people found purpose early. Some found it late. Some, like Diane Carter, found it in the wreckage of their worst day, when bikers broke down the door and broke open her heart and showed her that grief could transform into something powerful. 12 children saved in 3 months. 12 families reunited or given hope. 12 futures rewritten because one elderly woman paid attention and cared enough to act. This was her life. Now, guardian, protector, invisible soldier in a war against darkness. And she was just getting started. 1 year after Thomas's death, Diane Carter stood in her backyard planting roses. The same pale pink roses that had been on her mother's teacup, the one Tiny had so carefully restored. The cup now sat on a kitchen windowsill, filled with soil and a small succulent, its cracks visible but holding strong. Scout dug enthusiastically nearby, helping in the way dogs help, which meant mostly getting in the way. Diane didn't mind. The dog had become her constant companion. Her cover story turned real friend. The house on Maple Street looked different now. The Guardians had done more than repair it that first night. Over the past year, they'd transformed it. Fresh paint inside and out, a new fence, garden beds where Thomas had always meant to plant flowers but never found time. It was still her home, but it felt renewed. Reborn from tragedy into something stronger. Next door, the Henderson house sat empty, wrapped in police tape and legal proceedings. Eventually, it would sell, probably to someone who didn't know its history. Life would continue. But Diane would never forget what happened there, would never forget those 7 children or the strange blessing of being home at exactly the wrong, exactly right moment. Her phone buzzed. A text from Tank. New case. Possible trafficking house in Westfield. Needs surveillance starting Monday. You available? Diane smiled and typed back. Always. The work never stopped. There were always more children hidden in plain sight. Always more monsters disguising themselves as normal people. But now there were also guardians, watching and waiting and ready to act. Over the past year, Diane had been part of 17 rescues. 17 operations that brought children home or at least brought them to safety. Some were dramatic, like the first 2. Others were quiet. Just information passed to the right people that led to investigations and arrests. Agent Morrison had become a regular contact, calling Diane for consultations on cases involving elderly victims or situations where an older woman's perspective helped. The FBI had even hired Diane for a training session, teaching agents how to recognize signs of trafficking in residential neighborhoods. You see things we miss, Morrison had said. You notice the details law enforcement walks right past because we're looking for the obvious. The Guardian patch on Diane's vest had been joined by others over the months. A small embroidered dove for each successful rescue. A compass rose marking her as a navigator, someone who found the lost. A shield acknowledging her work with law enforcement. Each patch told a story. Each one represented a child saved. Beth stopped by that afternoon with fresh bread and gossip about another Guardian member who'd just gotten engaged. They sat on Diane's porch, drinking sweet tea and watching Scout chase butterflies in the yard. You seem happy, Beth observed. Really happy. I am, Diane said, and meant it. I miss Thomas every single day. Some mornings I still wake up and forget he's gone. But I'm not drowning in grief anymore. I'm living. Will you be proud of what you're doing? I think so too. Diane sipped her tea, watching the roses sway in the breeze. We wanted children so badly. Tried for years. Went through treatments that broke us financially and emotionally. Never happened. I thought that was our greatest tragedy. And now? Now I think maybe we weren't meant to have our own children because I was meant to do this. To help save other people's children. If I'd had kids and grandkids, I couldn't do surveillance work. Couldn't be invisible. Couldn't take risks. Diane set down her glass. Maybe the tragedy was actually preparation. Beth reached over and squeezed her hand. Thomas gave you 40 years of love. That's a blessing most people never get. And now you're using that foundation to build something else. Something just as important. That evening, Diane attended the Guardian monthly meeting at the warehouse. 50 members filled the space, from young men in their 20s to elders in their 70s. All united by loss and purpose. All choosing to fight back against darkness in whatever ways they could. Tank called the meeting to order. We've got updates on 3 active cases. Diane, you want a brief on Westfield? Diane stood, comfortable now with public speaking in ways she never was before. Possible trafficking situation. Residential area, middle-class neighborhood. Anonymous tip about children heard, but never seen at a rental property. I'll start surveillance Monday. Establish patterns, report findings. She sat down to nods of approval. This was her role now. The invisible watcher. The grandmother nobody noticed. The eyes that saw what others missed. After the meeting, Tiny approached with something wrapped in tissue paper. Made this for you. Thought you might like it. Diane unwrapped a ceramic teacup, hand-painted with pink roses. It was beautiful, clearly handmade, slightly imperfect in the way all handmade things are. Tiny, this is gorgeous. You made this? Been taking pottery classes. Turns out, I'm pretty good with my hands when I'm creating instead of destroying. He smiled shyly. I know it can't replace your mother's cup, but I wanted you to have something that wasn't broken. Something new. Diane hugged him. This enormous man with gentle hands and a generous heart. It's perfect. Thank you. She drove home with the new cup carefully secured in her passenger seat. Scout riding in back. The streets were quiet, families settling in for the evening. Normal people living normal lives, unaware of the underground network, working to protect the vulnerable. That was fine. The Guardians didn't need recognition. They needed results. At home, Diane placed the new cup beside the restored one on her windowsill. Old and new. Broken and whole. Both precious. Both telling stories of pain transformed into beauty. She made tea and sat in Thomas's recliner with Scout curled beside her. The vest hung nearby, ready for Monday's mission. Her phone was charged and programmed with emergency numbers. She was prepared. This was her life now. Widow. Guardian. Warrior in sensible shoes. The doorbell rang at 8 o'clock. Diane opened it to find Tank standing on her porch, holding a cake with a single candle. 1 year, he said simply. 1 year since we broke into your house and changed both our lives. Behind him, more Guardians appeared. Marcus and Tiny and Beth and a dozen others, all carrying food and drinks and smiles. They filled her small house with noise and laughter and life, celebrating the strange anniversary of the worst day that became the best thing. I can't believe you remembered, Diane said. Overwhelmed. We remember everything that matters, Tank replied. You became family on this day. That's worth celebrating. They ate cake and told stories about rescues and narrow escapes. Someone brought photos of the 7 children from next door, all doing well in foster care or reunited with families. Diane studied each picture, memorizing faces, storing hope that the little girl from the Riverside rescue was there too, brought by her adoptive mother. She'd gained weight and her hair was neatly braided. She smiled easily now, the haunted look replaced by simple childhood joy. She wanted to come, the adoptive mother explained. Wanted to see the lady with the dog again. The girl sat beside Diane and told her about school and friends and her new bedroom with pink walls. Normal things. Beautiful things. Things every child deserved. I'm learning to bake, the girl said proudly. Want to help me make cookies sometime? I would love that, Diane said, her heart full. After everyone left, after the house was quiet again except for Scout's gentle snoring, Diane stood at her bedroom window, looking out at Maple Street. The streetlights glowed soft orange. A cat crossed someone's yard. Wind rustled through trees. Everything looked normal. Peaceful. Safe. But Diane knew better now. Knew that evil hid in plain sight. behind closed curtains and nervous smiles and covered windows. Knew that children suffered while the world went about its business. She also knew that there were people fighting back. People who paid attention. People who cared enough to act even when it was hard, even when it was dangerous, even when nobody would ever know their names. The Guardians weren't heroes. They were just people who'd lost something precious and decided that loss would have meaning, that their pain would become someone else's protection. Diane picked up the framed photo of Thomas from her dresser. He smiled at her across the years, young and healthy and full of life. "Thank you," she whispered to his image, "for 40 years of love, for showing me what it means to build something that matters, for teaching me that broken things can be made beautiful again." She set the photo down and looked at her reflection in the mirror. An elderly black woman with silver hair and tired eyes and strength that went bone deep. A woman who'd survived loss and found purpose. A woman who mattered. Tomorrow she'd start surveillance on the Westfield house. She'd walk Scout past at regular intervals, noting patterns, gathering intelligence. She'd be invisible and essential, overlooked and invaluable, because 20 bikers broke into Diane Carter's house on the worst day of her life. They shattered her china and broke her door and gave her a reason to keep living when she had none. Wrong house, wrong address, right outcome. 7 children went home because of a mistake. 17 more because of a choice. One old woman found family in chaos and purpose in pain. Some called it tragedy. Diane called it grace. God works in mysterious ways, Thomas used to say. Diane believed that now more than ever. She turned off the light and climbed into bed, Scout jumping up to curl beside her feet. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new missions, new children to find and save. But tonight, Diane Carter slept peacefully in her restored home on Maple Street, surrounded by love both past and present, wearing the invisible armor of purpose, ready for whatever came next. Guardian, protector, witness to pain transformed into hope. This was her story. This was her life. And she was just getting started. Asterisk, if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Unbroken Great Stories community. Where are you watching from?